On my third wedding anniversary, I didn't get flowers. My husband brought home his mistress in front of my entire family. That was the day he learned I wasn't just the woman he married. I was the Lewis heiress. I walked out without a fight, but I came back for war. With my uncle and the Lewis group behind me, I'm not here to forgive or forget. I'm here to make sure they lose everything. The candlelight flickered in the crystal holders, casting a warm glow over the long mahogany dining table. I'd spent the afternoon making sure everything was perfect. A private dinner at home for our third wedding anniversary, just the way Daniel liked it. The table was set with white linen, silver cutlery, and the porcelain plates we'd received as a wedding gift from one of his business associates. I wore the dress he'd once said made me look like I'd stepped out of a magazine. I'd been looking forward to this night for weeks. A quiet, romantic evening, just us, a bottle of vintage red, and maybe, if I dared to hope, a promise to start over, to remember why we'd chosen each other. The front door opened. I rose from my seat, smoothing the silk of my dress, my heart lifting at the sound of his voice in the hallway. But then I heard another voice. Higher, sweeter, tinged with that calculated shyness I'd come to recognize in women who knew exactly the effect they had on men. When they stepped into the dining room, my smile froze. Daniel stood there in his navy suit, his tie loosened just enough to look effortlessly charming. His arm was around the waist of a woman I'd never met, petite, delicate features, glossy black hair spilling over her shoulders. She was dressed in a way that could be called elegant if you didn't know how deliberate every detail was. This, Daniel announced as if unveiling a new car, is Maya Lynn. I glanced at the table, then back at him. And she's here, why? The rest of the family, his mother Margaret, his uncle Harold, and a couple of distant cousins, exchanged looks that ranged from awkward to expectant. Daniel didn't hesitate, because she's going to be part of my life. Part of our lives. And she can help my career in ways you can't. The words didn't land immediately. There was a moment of stillness, the kind that stretches seconds into hours. Margaret broke it with a derisive laugh. Oh, Samantha, don't look so shocked. You've had your turn. But Daniel needs a partner who can actually bring value to the table. I turned to her slowly. Value? You mean more than the years I've spent keeping this family afloat? More than the debts I've paid? The bailouts? The house you live in? Her lips thinned. That house is family property. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a folded document, sliding it across the table toward her. No. That house is mine. Purchased with my money in my name. I have the deed, and I have every record of the payments I've made, including the gambling debts Daniel racked up in Macau, the loans you couldn't pay off, and the time I had to bail your brother out after his little misunderstanding with the police. Margaret's hand twitched, but she didn't reach for the paper. Daniel's face had gone stiff, the muscle in his jaw ticking. Maya shifted uncomfortably, glancing between us. I think maybe I should. No, Daniel said, tightening his grip on her waist. You should stay. You're going to be part of this family now. It was almost funny how quickly the room had turned into a stage. Every expression was a mask, every word a line in a play I hadn't agreed to perform in. But if they wanted drama, I could give them something to remember. I straightened my shoulders. Fine. You want me out? You've got it. I'll sign the divorce papers. But don't think for a second you're walking away with a scent of what's mine. Margaret scoffed. We'll see about that. Everything you have is tied to this family. I let a slow smile curl my lips. Margaret, you have no idea who I am, do you? Right on cue, the low hum of an engine reached us from outside. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the front, stopping just beyond the open doorway. The family's longtime housekeeper stepped in, bowing her head toward me. Madam, your car is ready. The driver is waiting. The shift in the room was palpable. Margaret's eyes darted between me and the car outside, confusion knitting her brow. Who are these cars for? She repeated. I walked past Daniel, past Maya, my heels clicking against the polished wood floor. For me, I smiled. Daniel's hand shot out, catching my arm. Why didn't you ever? Because you never asked, I said, shaking him off. I didn't look back as I stepped into the waiting car. The leather was buttery soft, the air inside cool and faintly scented with jasmine. The driver pulled away smoothly, leaving the house and the people inside it, shrinking in the rearview mirror. As the city lights came into view, I felt the first real smile of the night tug at my lips. They thought they'd discarded me. They had no idea what they'd just unleashed. The city skyline blurred past the car window, but my mind was fixed on something sharper. The look on Daniel's face as I'd left. Shock, disbelief, maybe even a trace of fear. For 3 years he'd believed he held all the power. That illusion had shattered tonight. When the car pulled into the gated drive of the Lewis estate, the world seemed to slow. Towering wrought iron gates swung open, revealing manicured gardens and a stately mansion that glowed warm against the night. This was home, not the house I'd shared with Daniel, but the place where I'd grown up learning what strength looked like. Walter Lewis was waiting in the foyer when I stepped inside. My grandfather's presence had always commanded respect, tall even in his 80s, with a sharp gaze that could pierce through any pretense. Beside him stood my uncle Richard, his tailored suit immaculate, his expression a mix of relief and controlled anger. "Samantha," Walter said, his voice gravelly but steady, "tell me every word that fool said to you tonight." I recounted the entire dinner. Maya's entrance, Daniel's announcement, Margaret's insults, and the final blow when I revealed the truth about the house. By the time I finished, Walter's jaw was set like stone. "That boy," he said, his voice dropping into a dangerous calm, "will regret thinking he could humiliate you and get away with it." He turned to Richard. "Get the legal team on this immediately. I want every asset, every share, every inch of property back where it belongs, in Samantha's hands." Richard nodded without hesitation. "Already in motion. We'll hit him with injunctions, debt calls and breach of marriage clauses by morning." I exhaled slowly. "Grandfather, I'm not here just to take things back. I want to work at Lewis Group. I've stayed quiet long enough." Walter's eyes softened just slightly. "You've always been capable. If this is what you want, I'll make the arrangements. But understand, Samantha, when you step back into that world, you'll be stepping into a war." "I'm ready," I said. And for the first time in a long time I meant it. The morning sun lit the marble floors of the Lewis estate as I came down to breakfast. Walter was already at the head of the table, scanning the financial section of the paper. Richard sat across from him, sipping coffee, his phone buzzing intermittently with messages from the legal team. "Everything's set," Richard said as I took my seat. "Your office will be ready by next week. But first," he slid an envelope toward me. "Today you collect what's yours." Inside was a formal notice granting me full authority to reclaim my personal belongings from the Carter residence, with Lewis Group security and movers present. I smiled. Perfect. We arrived just before noon, a black SUV convoy pulling up behind the moving truck. The moment my heels hit the driveway, I felt eyes on me from the upstairs windows. Margaret appeared first, her mouth tightening into a disapproving line. "You can't just barge in here." I handed her the document. "Court-approved retrieval order. Step aside." Inside, the movers began methodically packing my clothes, jewelry, and art pieces. Every box sealed felt like reclaiming another piece of myself. I was halfway through directing one of the movers when I noticed the glint of something on the coffee table in the sitting room. A diamond bracelet, my diamond bracelet, catching the light just so. It was the same one Daniel had claimed went missing months ago. Maya was perched on the sofa beside it, pretending to scroll her phone. Her fingers twitched toward the bracelet as I approached. "Interesting piece you've got there," I said, picking it up. "Looks exactly like the one Daniel gave me on our second anniversary." Her eyes widened. I found it in the guest room drawer. I was going to give it back." "Of course you were." My tone was sweet enough to make her flinch. Margaret stepped forward. "There's no need to make a scene." "Oh, I think there is," I cut in, raising my voice just enough for the nearby movers, and Daniel, who had just entered, to hear. "Stealing from me while living in my house? Bold move, Maya." Daniel's expression flickered from confusion to panic. "Samantha, this isn't." I held up a hand. "Save it. I'm taking what's mine, all of it. And soon you will hear from me for the house." The movers closed the last box and I walked out without another glance back. The sun was bright, the air crisp, and for the first time in years I felt the weight lifting. This was just the beginning. The evening after reclaiming my belongings, the Lewis estate was quiet. My grandfather had retired early and Richard was still at the office tying up a board meeting. I sat in the study, a cup of tea untouched beside me, staring at my open laptop. Names and titles scrolled across the employee directory of Lewis Group. I wasn't just reading them, I was committing them to memory. Years of marriage to Daniel had taught me one thing. People who plot against you rarely act alone. The knock on the door was soft. "Come in," I said. Ethan Park, Richard's long-trusted assistant, stepped inside. Neatly dressed in a gray suit, his expression was always calm but alert, like someone who already knew what you needed before you said it. "Miss Lewis," he greeted. The formality wasn't new. Ethan had always been respectful, but there was something sharper in the way he said it now. "Richard told me you wanted to see me." I turned the laptop toward him. "Pull a list of every current Lewis Group employee with the surname Chin. Cross-check their departments, titles, and any personal connections they have outside the company. Start with the planning division." His brow rose slightly, but he didn't ask why. "I'll have it on your desk by 8 tomorrow morning." "Good," I said. "And Ethan?" "Yes. Keep this between us for now. No one else needs to know what I'm looking for." He gave a small nod, the kind that carried the weight of a promise. "Understood." The Lewis Group headquarters loomed like a monument of glass and steel, its mirrored surface catching the early sunlight. The revolving doors spun constantly as employees filed in, briefcases in hand, murmuring over their phones or sipping coffee. I stepped out of the car, the sound of my heels crisp against the pavement. My driver offered to escort me inside, but I shook my head. This was something I needed to do alone. Inside, the lobby was a cathedral of modern corporate elegance. Marble floors, towering pillars, a chandelier of crystal teardrops suspended above a long reception desk. And there he was. Daniel Carter, in a tailored suit I recognized, one I had bought him during a trip to Milan. His hair was perfectly styled, his smile already smug as he saw me approaching. "Well, well," he drawled, stepping forward as if we were old friends meeting by chance. "Didn't expect to see you here, Samantha. Let me guess. You've realized what a mistake you made and you're here to, what? Beg me to take you back?" I paused in front of him, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Is that what you think?" His grin widened. "I don't have to think. I know you. You can't survive without me. This little act you've been putting on, reclaiming your stuff, playing the Lewis heiress, it's cute but it's not you." Before I could respond, a familiar voice cut cleanly through the air. "Ethan greets her as Miss Lewis." "Good morning, Miss Lewis," Ethan said as he strode across the lobby, a tablet in hand. His tone was warm but laced with professional respect, and it carried across the marble like a deliberate statement. I didn't miss the flicker in Daniel's eyes. Surprise first, then disbelief. He turned toward Ethan. "Miss Lewis." Ethan glanced at him as though he were a stranger asking an unnecessary question. "Of course. Samantha Lewis, the granddaughter of Walter Lewis and incoming executive at Lewis Group." Daniel's mouth opened, then shut again. The color drained from his face, his confident smirk faltering as if someone had yanked the rug out from under him. I smiled politely at Ethan. "Thank you. Do you have that list I asked for?" "Right here," Ethan replied, holding up the tablet. "Shall we go over it upstairs?" I took a slow step closer to Daniel, my heels clicking against the polished marble. "You see, Daniel, I'm not here to beg. I'm here to work. And I think you're going to find the next few weeks enlightening." As Ethan and I walked toward the elevator, I lowered my voice. "The annual party is next Friday, correct?" "Yes. Traditionally, it's employees only," he said. "Change that," I instructed. "Send an official memo. Every employee may bring one family member as a guest. Make it sound like a generous morale-boosting gesture from the board." Ethan tapped notes into his tablet. "Any specific reason?" "Director Chin from planning," I said evenly. "Make sure the invitation reaches him directly. I want his guest to feel welcome." Ethan's gaze sharpened. He knew better than to press, but I saw the flicker of understanding in his eyes. "Consider it done." The elevator doors opened and I stepped inside, meeting my own reflection in the mirrored walls. For the first time in a long time, I liked what I saw, not the wife who'd been blindsided at her own anniversary dinner, but the woman who was now setting the board for a game Daniel didn't even know he was playing. The ballroom glittered like something out of a dream, a chandelier spilling golden light over polished marble, the air alive with the hum of music and the murmur of hundreds of conversations. Waiters moved smoothly between clusters of guests, balancing trays of champagne flutes. I'd chosen my entrance carefully. Richard and I arrived together, his sharp tuxedo and easy confidence a perfect contrast to the deep sapphire gown I wore, its neckline daring but tasteful. Diamonds caught the light at my ears and wrists, a deliberate reminder to the crowd that I belonged here, not as anyone's wife, but as Samantha Lewis, heiress to the Lewis Group. The moment we stepped through the doors, heads turned. Conversations paused. A few whispers darted through the crowd like ripples in still water. Richard leaned down, his voice low but amused. "You're causing a stir." "That's the point," I murmured back, allowing a slow smile to curve my lips. It didn't take long to spot Daniel. He was working the room with a practiced charm, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, and pretending nothing in his life had unraveled. But I could see it, the slight stiffness in his posture, the way his eyes flicked toward me when he thought I wouldn't notice. Beside him stood Chin Wayman, director of planning, his round face split into a broad smile. I recognized him immediately from Ethan's research. According to Daniel, this was Maya's uncle, the connection he'd used to justify her presence in his life and the company. And then I saw her. Maya Lin in a pale pink dress designed to scream, innocent, clinging to Daniel's arm like an accessory. She glanced my way, and her expression tightened for just a fraction of a second before she leaned closer to whisper something to him. I waited until Chin Wayman's wife, Laura Chin, arrived at his side. She was elegantly dressed in emerald silk, her hair swept into a chignon, and she carried herself with the kind of authority that comes from being the one who actually keeps a household running. With Richard shadowing me, I crossed the floor, my steps unhurried. "Mrs. Chin," I greeted warmly. "It's so nice to see you here tonight." Laura smiled politely. "Miss Lewis. The pleasure is mine." I turned my gaze deliberately toward Daniel, then Chin Wayman. "I hear your husband has been spending quite a bit of time mentoring his niece, Maya Lin. In fact, Daniel here divorced me so he could focus more of his attention on her." There was a heartbeat of silence. Then Laura's expression froze, her head swiveling toward her husband. "Niece?" she repeated, her voice flat. Chin Wayman's smile faltered. "Well, technically, I have no niece named Maya," Laura snapped, her voice cutting through the room like shattered glass. Gasps rippled across the nearby guests. Laura's hand shot out, smacking Chin Wayman hard across the face. The sound echoed under the chandelier, drawing eyes from every corner of the ballroom. "You lying bastard," she shouted, the elegant poise gone, replaced by raw fury. "You think you can sneak around with some little—" Her words dissolved into another sharp slap. Chin Wayman tried to grab her wrist, but Laura wrenched free, snatching a glass of champagne from a passing tray and throwing it in his face. The golden liquid splashed across his suit, dripping onto the marble floor. Guests pressed closer, some pretending to be horrified, others clearly entertained. Phones discreetly appeared in hands, ready to record. Maya's face had gone pale. Daniel looked as though he wanted to melt into the floor. I didn't intervene. This was exactly the spectacle I'd orchestrated. When Laura finally stormed off, dragging her husband behind her by the sleeve, the room was buzzing with speculation. I turned to Richard. "Time to wrap this up." Ethan appeared at my side as if on cue. "Miss Lewis." "Effective immediately," I said, my voice calm but carrying enough to be overheard by those nearby. "Terminate the contracts of Chin Wayman and Daniel Carter. Grounds: misconduct, breach of company ethics, and reputational damage." Daniel's head snapped toward me. "You can't." "I can," I cut him off. And I just did. Without waiting for a response, I slipped my hand through Richard's arm and walked toward the exit. Behind me, the hum of gossip swelled like a wave, and I let it carry me out into the cool night air. The plan was working, and the next moves would be even better. The morning after the party, the Lewis Group headquarters felt sharper somehow, the air crisper, the tension more electric. News of the annual gala's chaos had already made the rounds. Every elevator ride, every coffee queue was buzzing with murmurs. "Did you hear about Director Chen's wife? She slapped him. Twice. In front of everyone. And then Miss Lewis fired them both just like that. And Daniel Carter? Humiliated. Totally blindsided." I hadn't needed to encourage the gossip. People loved a scandal, especially when it involved high-ranking staff. I was in my office reviewing a set of contracts when Ethan's voice crackled through the intercom. "Miss Lewis, you might want to come down to the lobby." I pressed the button. "Why?" They're here. When I descended to the ground floor, the noise hit me before I even saw them. A ring of employees had formed in the middle of the lobby, all craning their necks toward the center. Daniel Carter stood there, his suit wrinkled, his eyes sharp with indignation. Beside him, Margaret Carter was in full performance mode, her voice pitched high and quavering, hands clutched dramatically at her chest. "And after everything we've done for her," Margaret was saying, "she throws my son out on the street. Lies about him having an affair. Ruins his career." Someone in the crowd whispered, "Wasn't he with Maya Lin at the party?" Another answered, "Yeah, but Margaret's pretending that never happened." Daniel spotted me at the edge of the crowd. "Samantha, this has gone too far. You humiliated me at that party, you lied about my relationship with Maya, and you fired me without cause. I won't let you get away with it." Before I could respond, Margaret dropped to her knees with a theatrical gasp, startling the nearest employees. "Please," she cried, clasping her hands together. "Please be reasonable. My son has worked so hard for this company. We have nothing without his job. Show some mercy." The crowd murmured. A few people exchanged looks, some pitying, some skeptical. I stepped forward slowly, letting my heels echo against the marble floor. "Nothing without his job?" I repeated, my tone deceptively mild. "That's funny, Margaret. Because for the past 3 years, you've been living in my house. Driving my car. Eating food bought with my money. Do you want me to pull up the records for the gambling debts I paid off for your family? Or the time I bailed your brother out after his business misunderstanding with the police?" Her head snapped up, the tremble in her lip vanishing for a heartbeat. Then she tried to force the pitiful expression back, but the damage was done. The crowd had heard me. I let my gaze sweep the circle of employees watching us. "Tell me, everyone," I said, my voice carrying clearly, "how many of you would want a mother-in-law like this? One who moves into your home uninvited, spends your money, undermines your marriage, and then plays the victim when you finally put a stop to it." A ripple of laughter broke out. Someone muttered, "Not me." Another whispered, "She's shameless." Margaret's cheeks flushed a deep red. She scrambled to her feet, clearly realizing she'd lost the sympathy she'd been angling for. Daniel's face hardened, his jaw tight, but he didn't speak. He knew any defense now would just make things worse. I stepped closer to him, my voice low enough for only him to hear. "Go home, Daniel. You're finished here." Margaret straightened her back, adopting the imperious tone she reserved for moments she thought she was winning. "The divorce isn't finalized yet, Samantha," she announced loudly, as if she were delivering breaking news. "And as Daniel's wife, you know he is entitled to half of Lewis Group's assets as marital property." That earned a few raised brows from the spectators. One young intern whispered, "Did she just say half the Lewis Group?" The woman next to her snorted. I let a slow smile curve my lips. "Half of Lewis Group? That's adorable, Margaret. Daniel couldn't run a lemonade stand without my help, let alone a multi-billion-dollar company. But if you're so certain you're entitled to something..." I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. "Shall we review the proof of his affair?" As if the universe had been waiting for its cue, the glass doors at the front of the building swung open. Maya Lin stormed in, her pale pink dress swaying as she marched toward us, hair slightly disheveled, eyes blazing with righteous fury. "You've fired my uncle," she shouted the moment she reached Daniel, completely ignoring the audience around her. "You promised me you'd take care of everything after the party, and now you're just going to let her destroy both of us?" A loud murmur rippled through the crowd. Phones were coming out of pockets now. Employees recording this like it was their personal reality show. Daniel's face drained of color. "Maya, lower your voice." She cut him off, jabbing a manicured finger toward me. "She's the one ruining everything. You told me you loved me, that leaving her was for us. No. You're just letting her win." That was all it took. The whispers in the crowd turned into open commentary. "So much for no affair," someone muttered. "True love, huh?" another said sarcastically. "Was that before or after the wife paid off his debts? Guess the party chaos wasn't just gossip." I folded my arms, letting the satisfaction settle in my chest. "Thank you, Maya," I said sweetly. "That's exactly the confirmation I needed." Margaret whirled on her, her face mottled red. "Maya, you have no idea what you're talking about. This is not the time." "Oh, it's exactly the time," I interrupted, my tone silk over steel. After all, you just stood here in front of the entire Lewis Group staff claiming Daniel is entitled to half the company. But now everyone can see what you're really protecting, and it's not a marriage. The elevator chimed and Richard Lewis emerged, tall and composed in a charcoal suit that seemed to command the space around him. His gaze swept the scene. Daniel stiff and pale, Margaret seething, Maya looking seconds away from bursting into tears, before landing on me. "What," he said evenly, "is going on here?" Margaret seized the opportunity, stepping forward with a desperate smile. "Richard, thank goodness you're here. Your niece is." "Security," Richard said, not even glancing at her. His voice was calm but edged with finality. "Escort Mrs. Carter and her son off the premises immediately." Two uniformed guards stepped forward, their presence enough to make a few of the onlookers step back. Margaret's composure cracked. "You can't do this. We're family." "No," Richard replied coldly, "you're leeches who've mistaken generosity for weakness. That ends today." As the guards moved in, I stepped closer to Margaret and Daniel, my voice low but carrying enough for the nearest spectators to hear. "You have until the end of the day to get out of my apartment. If you're still there tomorrow morning, I'll have the eviction paperwork filed by noon, and you know I'll win." Margaret's lips parted in outrage, but I didn't give her a chance to respond. I turned on my heel and walked toward Richard, who was watching the scene with a faint smirk. "I think it's time I reclaimed my apartment," I told him. He nodded once, his gaze flicking back toward the spectacle as the guards escorted them out. "I'll have Ethan arrange everything. Make it memorable." A slow smile curved my lips. "Oh, it will be." The engine's low purr was the only sound as the convoy rolled up the tree-lined driveway. My black sedan led the way, followed by a line of identical SUVs. 20 bodyguards in all, each one handpicked by my security consultant. The Lewis estate came into view at the crest of the hill, its sprawling brick facade and white columns practically daring me to set foot inside. It wasn't technically my home anymore. Not since Daniel and his mother had decided I wasn't good enough to share their family legacy. But legally, the deed still had my name on it. I stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, the heels of my boots crunching against the gravel. The bodyguards fanned out instantly, two at my side, the rest taking positions at key points along the property. This wasn't just a visit. It was a reclamation. "Take everything," I told my lead guard, Mark. "Clothes, personal items, documents. Everything that belongs to me. Furniture and appliances stay." "Yes, ma'am." The front door swung open before we even reached it. Margaret sat in her wheelchair just inside, flanked by two household staff. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Well, if it isn't the runaway bride," she drawled. "What's this? Come to steal from us before the ink on your divorce is dry." I stopped just short of the threshold. "I'm here to collect what's mine. And since I knew you'd try to make a scene, I brought help." Her gaze swept over the bodyguards. "You think you can just storm in here? I could have you arrested for trespassing." At that, my lawyer Julia stepped forward from the back of the group. She was petite, with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, the kind of woman who could turn a courtroom into a battlefield. "Mrs. Lewis," Julia said coolly, "Samantha has full legal right to reclaim her property from this residence. She has already provided you with written notice, which you ignored. If you'd like to pursue trespassing charges, I suggest you review the court order in my hand first." Margaret's smirk faltered for just a second. "Court order." Julia held it up so she could see the seal. "If you refuse entry or interfere with the removal of Samantha's belongings, we will proceed to eviction by court order. And considering the debts tied to this property," she let the words hang deliberately, "you might find that process far less pleasant." Daniel appeared in the hallway behind her, his expression a mix of irritation and disbelief. "This is ridiculous, Samantha. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted. "And I am." Margaret clutched the arms of her chair, her knuckles whitening. "You have no idea what you're walking into. Do you think the world will see you as anything but bitter and vindictive?" "I don't care what the world sees," I said evenly. "I care about reclaiming what's mine, and making sure you too remember there are consequences for every lie you told." The movers streamed past us into the house, their footsteps echoing against the marble floors. They moved with precision, heading straight for the master suite, the study, the upstairs closets. Margaret's voice sharpened. You so much as touch my things and… No one's touching your things, I cut in. I'm taking only what belongs to me. Unlike you, I have no interest in theft. Julia pulled a thick envelope from her briefcase and handed it to Daniel. Debt records, she said simply. As of last week, you are behind on property tax, maintenance fees, and a substantial line of credit tied to the Lewis Group name. If this continues, the court will have grounds to seize assets, including this estate. Daniel flipped through the pages, his jaw tightening with every line. Where the hell did you get this? Public record, Julia replied. You'd be amazed at what becomes available when you stop pretending nothing's wrong. I stepped closer, lowering my voice just enough to make the next part sting. 1 month, Daniel. If the debts aren't cleared by then, the court takes over. And I'll be there to watch. Margaret's eyes flashed with fury. You wouldn't dare. Oh, I would, I said. She tried to maneuver her chair forward to block the hallway, but Mark and 2 other guards were already in place. Move, she ordered. Mark didn't flinch. Ma'am, you're obstructing legal property recovery. Please step aside. She let out a bitter laugh. Or what? You'll throw me out? You can't lay a hand on me. I tilted my head, meeting Mark's eyes. Lift her chair. Take it to the window. Gasps rippled through the staff as 2 guards stepped forward, gripping the sides of Margaret's chair. They rolled her toward the large bay window in the sitting room, each movement deliberate, giving her plenty of time to think about where this was headed. You wouldn't. Her voice wavered for the first time. Margaret, I said, leaning casually against the doorway, I don't want to hurt you, but I will remove you from my property one way or another. Your choice. The guard stopped just short of the window, its sheer curtains swaying in the afternoon breeze. Margaret's bravado cracked. Fine, she hissed. Do what you have to do. Just get out. The guards wheeled her chair back to its original spot. Upstairs, the movers were already boxing my clothes, jewelry, and personal files. I took one last walk through the rooms I used to inhabit. The master bedroom with its canopy bed and silk drapes. The vanity where I'd once sat brushing my hair in the mornings. The balcony where Daniel had promised me a future that turned to ash. On my way back down, I found Daniel waiting at the foot of the stairs. His shoulders slumped, the fight in him dimmed. I'll talk to Margaret, he said quietly. We'll leave. Just give me time. Time is exactly what you don't have, I replied. 30 days. That's all. He hesitated, then in a move I never thought I'd see from him, he dropped to one knee. Samantha, please. I'll pay what I can. Just don't push us out like this. I stared at him for a long moment, searching for sincerity, but all I saw was desperation. You should have thought about that before you burned every bridge you had, I said, my tone as cold as the marble beneath my feet. This isn't about revenge, Daniel. It's about closure. The last of the boxes were loaded into the trucks. My guards closed ranks as we moved toward the door, the movers following with the final pieces. At the threshold I turned back. Remember, 1 month. If I don't see proof of payment, the court will see to your eviction. And trust me, they won't be as polite as I was today. Margaret muttered something under her breath, but I was already walking toward my car. As the convoy pulled away from the estate, I rolled down the window just enough to let the cool air in. The house loomed in the distance, its grand facade suddenly looking more like a gilded cage than a home. For the first time in months, I felt the knot in my chest loosen. This was more than taking back a property. It was taking back control. The echo of the heavy front door slamming behind me was still ringing in the air when my convoy began to roll down the driveway. Through the tinted window, I caught a fleeting glimpse of Daniel standing in the middle of the foyer, his hand clenched into a fist, Margaret's wheelchair angled toward him like a shield. I didn't need to hear the words to know what was about to happen inside. Sure enough, by the time we reached the gates, their voices had risen high enough to carry even through the thick walls. You should have stopped her. Margaret's voice was shrill, slicing through the quiet like a blade. You just stood there like some pathetic lapdog and let her strip this house bare. Daniel's reply came low at first but quickly gained volume. What did you want me to do, mother? Throw her out in front of 20 armed bodyguards and a lawyer with a court order? You think I wanted this? Margaret wheeled closer, her face twisted with fury. If you hadn't been so careless, we wouldn't be in this mess to begin with. You let her keep her shares. You let her walk all over you in court. And now. Don't you dare blame this all on me, Daniel snapped, cutting her off. You were the one who encouraged me to push her out, remember? You said she'd fold. You said she wouldn't fight back. Margaret's hand gripped the armrest until her knuckles whitened. And you were supposed to handle her. Instead, she's humiliated us in front of the entire city. Do you know what the papers will say tomorrow? Do you know what this does to our name? Daniel laughed bitterly, running a hand through his hair. Our name? You mean your pride? That's all this has ever been about. Well, congratulations, Mother. You've managed to destroy both. Margaret's eyes flashed. If you'd been a real man, you'd still have your wife, your company, and your reputation. If I'd been a real man, Daniel said coldly, I would have chosen differently a long time ago. The silence that followed was sharper than any insult. At Lewis Group, Samantha and Richard talk. By the time I stepped into the Lewis Group's glass and steel lobby the next morning, the building hummed with a different kind of energy. Conversations hushed when I passed, but the glances weren't pitying anymore. They were measuring, assessing, some even approving. Word of yesterday's confrontation had traveled fast. Richard was waiting for me in his office, leaning back in his chair with a faint smile that told me he'd already heard the full report. Well? He asked, motioning for me to sit. Feel better? I raised an eyebrow. That depends. Did I go too far? He chuckled, reaching for the coffee carafe on his desk. If anything, you were restrained. I gave him a look. That's your professional opinion? That's my professional and personal opinion, he said, sliding a mug across to me. They've been exploiting your assets, tarnishing your name, and squatting in your property for months. What you did wasn't just justified, it was overdue. I sipped my coffee, letting the warmth settle in my chest. So it was a scene. Public. Messy. And effective, Richard countered. The board respects decisive action. The staff saw that you won't be pushed around. And the market? It loves a comeback story. I allowed myself a small smile. So you're saying this might actually work in my favor? I'm saying, he replied, leaning forward, it already has. Richard extended his hand across the desk. Welcome back, Samantha. The Lewis Group is yours to shape. I took his hand, gripping it firmly. I won't let it fall into the wrong hands again. Later that day, I walked the length of the executive floor. My floor now, stopping to greet department heads and staff who had once looked right past me. The air felt different here, lighter yet charged, as if everyone knew a shift had happened. I paused at the end of the hall, looking out through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the skyline beyond. The city stretched out in every direction, alive with movement and opportunity. This was where I belonged. Not in the shadows, not on the sidelines, and certainly not in the role of someone's discarded wife. When I returned to my new office, the same one Daniel had once occupied, I found Richard waiting with 2 glasses of champagne. To the Billionaire'S, he said, handing me one. I smiled, feeling the truth of the title settle around me like perfectly tailored armor. To never giving my power away again. The glasses clinked, the city glittered below, and I knew, absolutely without doubt, that this was only the beginning. The end.